Hey, everybody. Welcome to this episode of the B2B Revenue Leadership Podcast. Hey, it's another year, another time to make some more money, and I've got the course for you. Start the conversation, get the meeting will help your team, both business development, sales development, get into those new cold accounts, whether that function is under marketing or sales. I'll help you with that by starting organic, natural conversations, not pitching. Have people open up with you, build up a connection with them, understand your total addressable market, prioritize it, and put in a system that scales, that's predictable, that works the way you want it to work instead of the old school pitch. Believe me, I've sat through so many of these cold calling seminars, courses, books, and I've been doing it for 30 years, and it's evolved. And what I'm doing today is what's working in today's world. It works naturally, and people are just loving it, getting meetings, closing deals, and doing it without the rejection that is typically there in sales. So check it out at b2brevenue.com under the training tab. You can schedule a call with me. We can talk it over. I'll explain how it works and how we can work together on it. You can buy it per student, or I'll customize it for your particular product and team and coach you through that process. Also, if you're a sales leader and you want predictability, you want direction, momentum, and control with your deals, you can sign up for that course as well. Same type of model. A year-long access to it. It's content, community, and coaching, all included at b2brevenue.com. You can get my free ebook there on how companies make product selections. That's all free. Let's get into the interview, but I want to make sure you're checking out my partners. They're in the show notes. This week, it's Pipedrive and CoVideo. Pipedrive is the new CRM. It's been out for 5 years. I've been using it forever. I love that. It's connected up with your email, your calendar, and now they have team capabilities. CoVideo is the video email system. It's beautiful. It's wonderful. It's the way to break into new accounts. It's so much more engaging than text. Check them out. Also, make sure you're checking me out on LinkedIn, Brian G. Burns on LinkedIn. Let's get into the interview. I'll sum it up at the end. Hey, Mary, welcome back. As a way of getting started, give us a little update on yourself.
Hey, it's been a phenomenal year, and I'm thankful that you're bringing me back, because being on your podcast last time was one of the best experiences that I've had in the podcast world. So thank you for having me. Thank you for having me back. But we've grown substantially, and we're coast to coast, serving companies nationwide. And heard you had a good year yourself.
Yeah. So let's get into a topic I think we're both pretty passionate about. As far as like looking at these pipelines and forecasts, how do you guide your leaders through this process?
Pipelines and forecasts, it's different with every company, but you've got to get down to the metrics. The metrics are key. When we look at pipelines that aren't forecasted appropriately, meaning we're overstating the pipeline, we're putting non-qualified revenue in there. We find that we have deals that are pushing month to month, quarter to quarter. We could just be simply looking at a pipeline that we're wondering why we can't close more of it. We need to look at the metrics. What I would recommend for your sales leaders is to get into each rep individually and start looking at trends by rep. So depending on the size of your organization, you may want to do it by teams. If it's not, if you don't have too many sellers, you can do it by individual. But if you can start looking into the metrics and noticing some trends, that's going to be your first clue and inclination of what is going on in that pipeline.
Now, I remember being a rep. It wasn't that long ago. It was like the pipeline reflected what the manager wanted, not what was real.
Yeah. Which is why we want to look at the individual sellers, because you'll always find it's either people or process. It's one of the two, where we don't have a qualified pipeline that seems to be closing on schedule as indicated. If we look at process, sometimes we're looking at, did we qualify correctly? Are we putting the revenue in the forecast at the appropriate time in the sales cycle? We'll dig into that in a second. But to your point about behavior, when I was selling, I went out of the gate, I wanted to make my manager proud.
Yeah.
I wanted to prove that I was working hard. And one of my personality characteristics is I'm overly optimistic. And
Go
I
figure.
had one of those pipelines where everything was going to close. I had a discovery meeting. I'd walk out of there. Shoot, Brian, I didn't even need to have the discovery meeting. Sometimes the appointment setting was so promising, I was going to close that deal, right?
Yeah.
And I was forecasting that revenue before I ever even qualified it. So sometimes it's reps' perception and rep behavior because they want to make their manager proud. Or it could be a negative that they're trying to cover up for the lack of work or results that they're doing. And it's to the point that it's nearly falsified pipeline.
It is, because the classic 3X, some people do 5X, 10X, what the quota should be. And I think this has a counterproductive element to it, meaning that if you've got 3 times your pipeline, 3 times your quota, 2/3 of your time is wasted on deals that aren't going to close.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's the shift that had to happen in me. In my first year or two in sales, I worked a lot harder than I needed to. Yeah. And I think a lot of people can say that they did that. But when I started to gain the wisdom and have the discernment that it's okay to say no to prospects, that you don't have to try and close everything that is in the pipeline, it's actually very freeing, because if you can wait and to forecast any revenue until after you've done a qualified discovery. And I mean, you're walking out of that discovery understanding why, like, what problem are we solving? Why would they even do business with us? As you know, a buyer is more prone to make a decision to buy if they are experiencing a pain or problem versus a buyer who just wants a gain. If you crash your car on the road and it's totaled, you have to go get a new car. That buyer is more likely versus just driving down the road and seeing a Tesla or Lexus and thinking, maybe that looks nice, I might upgrade. So training reps to have that discernment of, is this a problem we're solving, or is this a gain? Is this an enhancement to their current situation? Because that helps understand the urgency and the cost of the current problem that's going to drive them to make the decision. So are we solving a problem? Then we look at what are they willing to invest or spend to fix that problem, and what's the cost of doing nothing, and what type of budget has already been set aside. What are they paying currently? What are they willing to invest on top of that to fix the problem? Do you have quantifiable ROI? So really enhancing that money step. Then we get into timeline, understanding why we're going to kick off a project or start on a certain date or cut over or switch or whatever your industry terminology is. Why that date? Does someone just pick that date? Is there implication of not doing that date? What happens if we don't hit that timeline? And the last is, how does this company even make a decision? Not who makes the decision, but how do they make the decision? And have we really qualified every single step of that process? Everyone who's going to have influence on the deal, everybody that's going to need to share an opinion and that we need to involve. And truly, what does that process look like to get the deal signed and implemented? Once you walk out of a discovery, maybe you need 3 or 4 discovery meetings to get all that data. If you wait until that point to forecast your revenue and you train your teams to do that, all of a sudden your close rates go through the roof. And that frees the rep. When I learned this, probably end of year 1, early year 2 in my sales career, and I realized, wait a second, if one of my prospects doesn't hit one of those marks, it's okay to say no. And it's okay to not put it in the pipeline and to just put a reminder in the CRM that we're going to pick this up when we actually have a buying event, a reason to buy across all of those different areas. What it does to the salesperson at that time and what it did to me was to say, well, that means I don't have enough pipeline, so I better go find more qualified revenue. Because I think our pipelines create this false sense of security in our sales role. But if we're honest,
right,
then we can work harder and actually, I guess, work smart too, right? And fill it with qualified pipeline.
And how do you coach leaders through the stages in the forecast? Because I think, everyone's got this at the negotiating stage and then it's closed. Mm-hmm. But that could be a year. That doesn't mean it's going to be this quarter. Mm-hmm. The sales leader is looking at this 9-month or 90-day window, and the rep is telling the manager whatever they want to hear, or they say, the quote expires at the end of the quarter, so the deal is going to close at the end of the quarter. Isn't that how it works?
Yeah, exactly. Perfect. Sales is so easy.
Well, we offered them a discount, so they're incentivized.
Oh, yeah, they're definitely going to do it. They told me they're signing tomorrow by end of day. And that's weird because then 5 o'clock rolls around. Where's the document? I don't know. They didn't return any of my calls or emails today. And I keep checking my email, but it hasn't come through. I don't know what happened. Right.
So how do you get them? How does a leader forecast then?
Right. You've got to bring in a new level of sincerity and communication with the reps. This is a mental mindset shift that has to happen. The challenge with most sales leaders is they'll inherit reps, or as they recruit and grow their team, the reps have been in different sales environments and different forecasting, et cetera, has been acceptable. And the sales leader needs to own what the definition of forecasting is within their own sales team. And they have to communicate, and they have to communicate often. I attended a seminar yesterday on a wildly different topic. And the person leading the seminar says to get everybody on board with a vision or a definition of something, it takes 7 times to communicate it, repeat it, and get everybody to understand that you should, until you are sick of repeating yourself, you haven't said it enough. And I feel like when you're setting that culture with your salespeople, this is because let's be honest, most sales leaders have to report that number up, right?
Exactly.
So there's a part of them that is willing to believe the rep and maybe not dig into it all the way because they also have to answer to somebody. So it really starts with going down to the field level and being heavily involved in pipeline management. The sales leader, to the extent that they're able, from a pipeline management standpoint, those 4 questions that I shared with you, so knowing the decision process, the timeline, the actual money step, all ins and outs of it, and what problem are we solving? Why would we even do business? If the sales leader can start implementing that through pipeline management on every single deal and not allow their reps to forecast revenue until they have the 4 of those, but they have to hold them accountable and they have to do it to the extent of if a rep puts a deal in the CRM and they don't have that, they need to enforce and make the rep take it out until they have that information. And when we do have these quotes by the end of the quarter, I get it, but they need to have the rep needs to have a scheduled date and time conversation to get it signed and to get it moved through, or some sort of email documentation, a commitment from the buyer that it is going to happen. And one of my favorite topics is changing out expectations versus agreements. So expectations, Brian, have you ever had an expectation of somebody and they didn't do it?
Occasionally.
Right. So then we ask ourselves, well, did we communicate it to them?
Yeah.
And oftentimes we don't, but take it a step further. Okay, we communicated to it. Did they agree to it? Okay, if they agree to the expectation, now we have an agreement, but we need to take it one step further, which is we need a repercussion if they don't do it. We need consequence, or we need a backup plan. And most reps won't take the decision process to that extent. So they'll get a verbal from a buyer. Yeah, you know what? If you can knock off $1,000 off the setup fee and I get it, it expires end of month, we'll move forward. The rep's like, amazing, I'm going to get this deal. But they don't take it to the extent of, well, then this is what needs to happen. The DocuSign, the agreement is coming to you. I'll need you to sign within 24 hours. Let's do this. If for some reason something comes up on your side and I don't have a signature within 24 hours, I'm going to put a meeting on the calendar for us to touch base, a 10-minute phone call to figure out what's going on. Should I call you in the morning or the afternoon? What's best? I'm sending that invite right now. So our expectation for that call is that if we don't get a signature, you and I are going to figure out what we're doing. Do you agree to that? Yes. And you put it in. So they've got to take this all the way through, and the sales leader needs to enforce it.
And I think I think you're 100% right by making that pipeline review, really guiding the rep through how a deal works. Mm-hmm. Instead of hearing what you want to hear from a person who has no real political power or financial or economic capability.
Yes.
You know, because I have VCs on and who have been vice presidents. I've been a vice president at a big company. I had a sign off of 0. if I couldn't put it on my company card, all I had was a little bit of influence.
Right.
And most VPs tell me it's about 5K.
Wow.
So when you hear that, you're like, that person has to go convince other people.
Yes.
Right. So now you might have a leader who either has never done this or hasn't done it in a while, or did it at a place where it was more account management versus brand new account development. I think we have to open up the black box of how companies get things done.
Yes. And an easy way to do that is ask how they've made a decision, but like this before. Yeah. So the last time you purchased X, what did that look like? Oh, you weren't around when that happened. Okay, so let's talk to the person, or let's get some insight. Yeah. Here's what we typically see with your size organization or your industry. Historically, we seem to go through this multi-tier process. Sometimes a board is involved. What we notice is that the VP can make the decision, but as far as executing financially, they may have a $5,000 cap on what they're able to spend. And so there's another person that's going to authorize an expense. What does that look like in your organization? When is the last time you made a purchase that was over $50,000? How did that get approved? Hey, the last time you bought this type of product or service, who gave you the most pushback internally when you presented this for final authority and execution of the contract? What does it look like with legal? Is that internal, external? So I put this contract in front of you. What are the chances this thing gets fully executed, or how long does it typically sit with legal before we're able to execute? But most reps don't ask those questions.
They don't know to. That's
good.
Yeah, because they've been taught how to do a great presentation, a great demo, and they don't understand how companies make these decisions. And all of a sudden, when you're working with somebody on the other side who doesn't know how they make the decision.
Correct. And then they have to use their assertiveness and confidence, and they can't be shy. I mean, if they're not a strong negotiator, if they have a need for approval, so they care what people think, if they don't normally, if they don't have this track record of selling to executives or high-powered individuals that make big financial decisions, if they don't have this experience, they're actually quite lacking, and you can't give what you don't have. And this goes on the sales leader to be able to understand the DNA and competencies of all of their sellers. They need to know if they have taken a deal through the execution of the sale, what it looked like, how many decision makers they had, what the process was, and the sales leader has to own that. They need to do an inventory check on their team right now of even who has the skills and experience, and they need to own it. If their product or service that they sell requires this level of execution on the end, and they're looking at closing more of their pipeline, which probably most sales leaders would like to do that, then they need to own it, and they need to bring in this training and coaching and development for their team.
That's it. And I think too many of them just want to fill up the pipeline hoping that a certain percentage will go through. And I always use it's like the 1800s where people had 12 kids because only 3 lived. It's like that's not the way to do it.
Oh my gosh. But sales is a numbers game, right? All you have to do is put it in and eventually something will close.
Well, the numbers are backwards, though.
It's bad. It's bad. Yes, people do have that hope as a strategy. And it's shocking, but that's how they're wired. That's how they're built. We do in our industry, in the world of sales development and training and coaching and whatnot, you do have a lot of focus. Sales leaders put a lot of focus on activity and the pipeline, and good reason, because you can't close deals out of thin air. Like you can't close a deal that was never in the pipeline. So I do understand that, but there has to be the same amount of emphasis on the back end of the sales cycle as there is on the front end. And there are selling, negotiating, and closing skills that have to be honed.
And that's it, because if you do the historical data, you got Pareto's law, and then I try and teach people about Price's law, where it's the square root of the number of deals represents 50% of the revenue.
Is that true?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Which really takes you like, okay, get rid of or de-emphasize the other 50% and work from time of closure versus likelihood of closure.
I like that. Yes.
Because then you start thinking, well, they don't care about our end of quarter. They care about when they want the outcome of what they get from doing this. What is that date?
And that is uncovered in discovery. Deals are won or lost in discovery, in my opinion. You qualify everything that you need to know in discovery. Do you find things out in demo step? Of course you do. Do you find things out when you get into the latter half of the sales cycle? Yes, you do. But in discovery is where you're able to uncover those 4 key areas that we discussed and know if you have a deal. That timeline, that piece that you just mentioned, understanding the timeline, it's not, like you said, it's not about the seller's quarter. When am I getting the signature? That was brilliant what you just said. It doesn't matter to the buyer when you're getting credit for the sale or when they're signing a document. Put it in their terms. It's a go live date. It's kicking off implementation. It's a cutover. It's a switch date. It's a whatever. And what is the implication? Why did we choose that date? I find many reps don't dig deep enough. So the buyer will say, well, we want to go live on July 1. Okay, great.
Work backwards from that. Yeah.
Hold the phone. Well, great. We can work backwards, but why July 1?
Yeah.
What's going on in the business? And then you start asking questions. You uncover, well, we're supposed to wrap up our transition over to our new ERP. That should wrap up by the end of May. Summer seems to be our slow season. We'll pick back up in the fall. So we do all of our changeover switches for things like this in the summer, right? But you have to understand why, because then if you get to that end of the quarter or whatever it is, and you're trying to get a signature, you're trying to get a sale, you have the prospect's words and you understand the importance and the implication around that timeline. So if your deal starts pushing or things can't get moving fast enough or the executive unexpectedly has to go out of the country or whatever it might be, you can always fall back on that agreed upon timeline that you have and use the prospect's words of the implication of not doing that to try to find a way around whatever objection they're giving you as to why they can't execute the deal. And that's being a consultant, not a salesperson.
Yeah, and you got to sell that you do not move on a dime. I use the analogy, let's say you wanted to put a pool in your backyard. If you sign the contract on June 30th, guess what day you want to go swimming? July 1st, right?
Yes.
But guess what? So does everybody else on Earth.
Right.
And then all of a sudden you go, well, if you want to start swimming July 1st, we're going to have a contract signed April 30th. All of a sudden you start to see like why you have to do things now. It's like we're not sitting around for waiting for you to sign the contract for the pool. We've got a backlog.
Yes.
And I think customers think that you're waiting for them to sign the contract and that the engineers are going to show up the next day and implement in 48 hours.
Right. And here's a great way to understand this point. You sell what you sell every day of the year, but your buyer may only buy it once every 3 years, once every 10 years. Maybe it's the first time they've ever bought it. Maybe it's a once in a lifetime purchase.
Yeah.
We can't assume that they understand the buying process and how it works. And again, this is where the rep can come in and educate and be more of a consultant than a salesperson just trying to get an order, trying to get a signature. If they can extend their conversation into the buyer's language or the prospect's language, understand their day in the life, understand the outcome, like you said, that they're working towards, you're having their conversation. You're not inviting them to yours.
And how does this transition work with your clients? What's the reception you get when you walk them through this?
Well, it's masterful, but it takes time. What we often see, I've got a good story for you. We implemented this with one of our clients in Southern California, and we've got a sales leader there and a sales team of 8 people. And we first had to start with him to train him to understand pipeline management and hold his reps accountable to only forecasting revenue that was qualified by the new definition. To the extent that every day while we were going through this transition, again, it's a shift in mental mindset, it's a shift in behavior, it takes time. and every rep is going to adhere to it differently. But he would check Salesforce every single morning and would look at every net new revenue. And then he would look, because we added fields in Salesforce to make sure that we had the qualifications to make sure that this is qualified pipeline revenue. And he would see certain fields missing. So he would go out onto the floor and he'd talk to the reps, and he would have to say, I took the deal out of Salesforce because it's not qualified, because you don't have this information. And then they would be mad, right? So they'd pick up the phone, they'd conduct another discovery, they'd call back that prospect, and they would use that talk track. Oh man, can't believe it. I walked out of the meeting yesterday and I realized we completely forgot to talk about the budget, or we completely forgot to talk about the timeline, or whatever the missing piece was. And he started to notice that because he held firm on what the definition was, and it was a learning curve for the reps, but all of a sudden they're all picking up the phone, they're all going back out and they're doing more discovery. Yeah. Well, now they're on a fiscal year, so they're in their Q4. They're going to have their highest grossing quarter in history. But that is finally because we have qualified pipeline revenue, and these buyers have a qualified reason to do business, and we know how they do business, and we got the agreement on that. So yes, it is masterful in how it works, but the sales leader has to stay firm and has to implement and hold these people accountable.
Because that has to be the discipline. Because if you don't have the sales leader bought in, everything's gamed.
Oh, correct. Yeah. And you can't let anyone slide. So that's my next piece of advice. We all have that maverick sales rep, right? That rep that you just don't even want around your other reps because they are amazing, they sell, but they're completely rogue, and you don't want them to rub off on your other reps. And you may have that top producer. You may have that one person that you feel like, well, I don't really want to enforce it with them because overall they do a pretty good job. And gosh, this person really hates when I tell them what to do, and you're going to be met with a lot of defense. And so you don't want to really enforce it with them, and you kind of just let them be. You can't do that in this scenario, because this is a full mental shift as well as a behavior shift. And if the whole team isn't executing on it and someone's getting away without doing it, then it's going to cause others to not want to follow suit. So that sales leader has to stay firm.
And how long have you seen it taken? Is it more than a quarter? Or?
It depends on the company's sales cycle. Yeah. This one has a 90-day sales cycle. So it took a full quarter for us to see this come into play. I mean, we had some quick wins very early on where we were able to progress deals that had been sitting out there for a long time. We were asking better questions, we had better qualification, and we were able to move these deals forward. So you will get some quick hits, but to get the whole team on board, I would say it matches your sales cycle. If you have a 30-day sales cycle, you're going to see a big shift within a month. If you have a 6-month sales cycle, it's probably going to take you 2 quarters to get there.
And do you still add percentages to them, or is it stages, or is it expected close date?
Yeah, I don't. What we coach our teams is we don't want any revenue forecasted unless we have all of those qualifiers, and so the close rates go through the roof. Now, one category that we've developed is like discovery revenue, is a projection so that we can see the reps projected top of funnel, if you will. Yeah. So we can see that they've got 1.2 million that is pending qualification. So you can track that, but you need to have a different definition. That is not pipeline revenue that I would that's revenue that's qualified or should be forecasted. So I think that you can keep a different metric and say if it's we set the appointment, we've gone through some pre-qualification, maybe we've done a fact gathering discovery, but we really haven't met with the department heads or the executives or the leader in this decision. So we don't have all of those pieces, but we're projecting that this is a $70,000 deal. That can be somewhere. And then as soon as it's qualified, you shouldn't be forecasting it until you have the timeline of the decision process, the budget, and the actual problem that you're solving. By the time you project that, so that would be after discovery. So if we're looking at typical selling stages, you have pre-qualification where you're setting the appointment, you have discovery. After discovery, you typically see a demo or a solution presentation. step, and then you've got negotiation and close. So I would look at not projecting qualified revenue until we are after discovery. And depending on the company, if they are still conducting some discovery in a demo, you may even need to hold it out until after your completed demo or solution presentation step, whatever that looks like. But that's where I would be inserting the pipeline revenue and forecasting it. So you asked about probability percentages. I think once we get a deal with these 4 qualifiers uncovered, answered, and agreed upon by the buyer, and we've made it through discovery and maybe in the middle of that demo solution presentation step, I think your probability, and this will, again, track the metrics. That's what we opened up this call with, track the metrics and see what the trends are. But you'll probably have at least a 50 to 80% probability at that stage. And then you can look at progressing that even further. Once you get into negotiation, you have potentially a verbal, or you've got a list, maybe that's a 90% probability.
Cool. Hey, it's been a fun conversation, Mary. Where do people go to connect with you and learn more about your work?
Yeah, I'd love to connect with you on LinkedIn, and you can check us out at salesbq.com. That's BQ like the behavioral quotient.
Hey, I hope you enjoyed that interview. Hey, I want to make sure you're checking out b2brevenue.com. That is where you can get a free copy of an ebook that I did. It's a real ebook. It's not a fluff book. It shows and talks about how companies make buying decisions and how you can influence that from both a marketing and a sales standpoint, how to find all the people that are in the decision path and what they need to see, know, and touch and feel before they make a product selection. If your team needs some coaching, some help, some training, some systems, some processes that do work today, because we know what doesn't work, or you know what doesn't work, I'll show you what does work and how to connect and get into pretty much any account. It includes deal coaching and content community, and I can customize it for your particular company. Just go to b2brevenue.com, look under training, schedule a call with me. We can talk it over, or just sign up. You can pay per month or all at once, whichever makes most sense for your budget. Also, I put out videos pretty much daily on LinkedIn and on YouTube. On LinkedIn, it's Brian G. Burns, and on YouTube, it's Brian Burns Sales. Just search for that if you like to consume some video content. And if you see me on LinkedIn, please put a comment and a share and a like on some of the videos. I really appreciate it. I've got a company page for each podcast. This one, the B2B Revenue Leadership Podcast, where I put both content and humor videos out daily. And tell a friend about the podcast. Really appreciate you listening. Check out the show notes for all the partners and the connections you can make there, the coupon codes for the products to evaluate them, see if they're a right match for you. And we'll see you next time.